Hello and welcome to Plugged In, the OB gaming series where we share insights from industry leaders and innovators. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Chris Bruzzo, Chief Experience Officer at EA. Quick intro to Chris. Despite always being a gamer, Chris didn't join the industry until 2014, having spent the first part of his career in some pretty impressive marketing positions with Amazon and then driving digital transformation at Starbucks. The common thread through all of that has been his commitment to putting customers and players first. Customer-centric, player-centric, we hear it all the time, but Chris really is a true advocate of this. And a little while ago, Chris and I had a really interesting conversation about how internal cultures can improve player experience. And I thought we should be recording this. Chris was more insightful than me in that conversation, I'll admit. But today we're hopefully going to build on that chat that we had. And my kind of overarching question for Chris today is, how can gaming organizations build internal cultures that improve the player experience? And we'll get to the how, but I think it's probably quite important to cover off what type of culture improves player experience in your mind, Chris? And is it the same for every game?
Yeah, well, there are some things that are the same. So thanks, Kathryn. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to be here and to talk about this. I'm really passionate about it. So because, culture eats strategy for breakfast or execution for breakfast. And so you can have all kinds of other great things, but if you don't have a culture that is inclusive, that has diverse representation, then you really can't hit your potential. And in fact, those things can become a very serious drag on your success, especially over time. That's the thing about the culture, is it's insidious. It may not show up on, at crunch time on one game, or it may not show up in a 3-month period of time, but over the course of years, it has, either an incredibly positive effect on things that you're known for and that you're great at, or it becomes this drag that eventually pulls you down. And we've certainly seen examples of that in gaming.
And do you think it's the same for all games? Because when I've had this conversation with people in the past that share different views, it can be argued that if you are working on a very niche game that has a very particular player demographic in mind, do you need to find people that play the game to actually work on the game, or do you need a broader set of individuals to bring a different way of thinking?
Well, I think rather than that sounds a little bit like treating it like a math exercise, which is, have we studied exactly all the different kinds of people that might play our game, and as a result, we've hit the ratio correctly for each one of them. And hey, that doesn't apply to us because we're a small game, we're an indie game, or we have a focused audience, and so that all sounds a lot like math and also a lot like excuses. I think the overriding reality is, when we bring in more perspectives, when we challenge ourselves to create an environment where people from different backgrounds or different styles even have an opportunity to contribute and make an impact on a game, I think that makes the game better every time. Whether it's a small niche game or a big, broad mass market game, it's really more like, do you want to get more of what you've always got? Because if you just want to get more of what you've always got, then just hire more people just like you with the exact same background.
And come up against the same problems again and again.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think there's no question that closed systems die and open systems thrive. And so here we're talking about, like, let's create open systems. Let's not give ourselves excuses like, hey, we're just going to close down. We're just gamers, or we're just whatever, RPG people. And so we can be a closed system. Nobody else has to come in. And I don't think that actually leads to evolution or growth or the next generation of interesting experiences. None of that happens in a closed system. Yeah.
And I think it's probably that way of thinking comes from smaller studios sometimes that have very small budgets, that have, you know, tight on time, and need to deliver something to perhaps receive more funding at whatever stage. And it does become a difficult balancing act, as awful as it sounds, because it shouldn't be a balancing act, but there are lots of other things at play. So what would your advice be? And I suppose it comes back to the first question, you know, how do you do that? And do you do that in different ways for different environments?
Yeah, but I think it's a great point. It does vary. If you're a larger organization, you can afford to have more resources. You can afford to have some capabilities that everyone shares across multiple studios. I totally understand that's very different. So that's why I think it kind of comes back to, is our culture inside our organization, no matter how big or small, is it going to be one where people feel safe and included, where our employees, you know, within that organization, do they feel safe, included? Do they feel like that there's a desire for opening up the aperture of perspectives and diversifying sort of maybe what has been the kind of can be a kind of calcified approach to the way we've always done things? That's just more of a fundamental commitment in your culture. And then it can lead to, well, we can't really afford to have an inclusive player experience team like we have at EA. We're too small a studio for that. Fine. Can you spend a few hours learning and thinking about how to adjust the way you hire people, or getting some training and education on unconscious biases, or on ways to make meetings feel more inclusive to people that have different styles? I mean, those are all things that are like investments, and the investments, no matter how small, no matter how many hours, no matter how many people, the investments are worth it, because you're learning and growing. And at the end of the day, it becomes part of like, well, this is just who we are. This is how we operate. That's maybe more fundamental than, oh, I have a lot of resources, so I can create a lot of, you know, focused teams, or I don't have a lot of resources, so I get to sort of opt out of this whole thing. You know, I don't think that's necessarily true.
And the unconscious bias piece is difficult, because clearly it's unconscious and people aren't aware of it. But I think, you know, we all like people that are like us, whether we want to believe it or not. We do. And when you are involved in an industry that is so passionate, when it's someone that shares the same passion as you, and if they are very similar to you in that sense, it's really difficult to get past that. So if someone doesn't necessarily share the exact same passions and then somebody else does, it's quite hard to separate that. And I think, you know, leaders can underestimate how much that really sways their decision making when they're bringing people into some of the smaller studios, but also some of the larger studios as well. How did you go about building the team at EA? And you know, do you feel as though, was there friction to begin with? How's the journey been since you've been there, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in most organizations, the majority of people that do not have ill intent. They have good intent. They're good intentioned, but sometimes they just get stuck in a pattern. So we were certainly in a pattern of having, just from a hiring standpoint, having job requisitions that had really long lists of requirements.
Yeah.
And the requirements over time got very, very specific about, you know, the kinds of experience and the numbers of years with that specific kind of experience that you had to have to even be considered for a role. And that just has the effect of excluding a lot of people. In fact, we know that underrepresented groups already start with a perception that they may not be qualified. So we got curious about this. We started reading the research. We know that women in general are more concerned about wanting to have all of the requirements in a job before they will even apply.
Yeah.
And so And so we changed that. And the way we did it was we came together as a group and we said, okay, these are the roles we have open. Let's take a look at each one of them. And we would assemble hiring managers and leaders and everyone else in a regular meeting. And then we would say, okay, you've got 12 requirements for this role. Let's see if we can really examine each one and why that's a requirement. And in the end, we were able to open up a lot of those requirements, reduce the number of them, and open up the language a bit so that we could actually invite people from other parts of entertainment, people who've worked in other parts of entertainment besides gaming, or people who worked in other industries besides gaming. And that was just one part. That's just the making the jobs feel like they're available and a possibility for more people. And then we just kind of had to follow that every step through. Okay, now how are we sourcing our candidates and how are we interviewing them? And each step of the process, we looked at it and said, can we make this more open? And that was an effort that we focused on, but it didn't take over our lives. It was a better use of the hours we were already spending working on hiring. But it probably took a year, maybe a year and a half before it started showing up in the numbers of greater diversity. And now we're adding 1% to 2% female talent every year. So we've gone from 23 to 24, from 24 to 25. This year, 25.5% of our employees are females. We've grown the number of women people leaders. We've grown the number of women who are in technical roles. And then at EA, we also focus on growing the Black African-American population and the Hispanic population in the company. And so those are our three areas of focus: women, Black, and Hispanic. And we're seeing significant growth in all those areas just by taking the time we were taking already on things like hiring and applying it in this much more open and inclusive way.
Yeah. And I think people, you underestimate the importance of language in job ads, but it makes a huge difference. There's I think it was HBR, there was an article I was reading earlier that can't quite remember the stats, but something around actually reframing one bullet point, one requirement that was in a specific job spec, and this was outside of gaming, by the way, but it increased the number of female applicants by 31%, I think it was.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it was exactly the same requirement, but it was phrased in a less masculine, slightly less aggressive way. And it has impact, and that probably that would have impact on all genders actually. It's just thinking more broadly and being more open to communicating in a different way. And what impact have you seen on the actual games? If you think about kind of your time within the business, building these more inclusive teams and building that culture of having a voice and not being afraid to be your authentic self. What have you seen what's the output been on some of the games, or things that you're particularly proud of?
Well, I mean, there's several, but probably the one example that sticks out for me was in May of 2021, we announced that we were going to go after customizable pronouns in The Sims. And so we did a lot of work around that. We worked with a lot of different organizations in the LGBTQ community, and developed a feature that allows players to customize their pronouns in The Sims in the Create a Sim part of the game. And we took that all the way through. I mean, that kind of openness, we applied it to all the ways in which you can customize or personalize your sim, and we're still on that journey. We're not perfect, but we've done some notable things to live by our values around inclusivity, and this is one of them. But we have work to do. Just this week, we made some big announcements. Last week, sorry, we made some big announcements about The Sims, and we didn't have great representation in the within all of the people who were speaking and the creators that were represented. And we got called out on that by the Black community. They said, "Hey, where are the Black Simmers? We're a huge impact on The Sims," and we apologized because it's a journey. Like we are far from perfect, but our intentions are good, our values are right, we're curious, we're learning, we're trying to get better. And so it does, we're going to be improving over time. But I love the fact that The Sims just continuously kind of opens the door to new expressions in gaming.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And it's a fantastic platform of a game to be able to do that with, isn't it?
It's a life simulation game. So yeah, it's perfect for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose that, and you mentioned that didn't get it right last week. It demonstrates the impact of not having enough diversity in the room when you're making those decisions about, how to represent yourselves as a business in a game. Because actually, if you'd had more diversity in the room at that point, that would have been picked up before it became an issue, actually, and you'd have been able to rectify that. So it does kind of show in real time, I guess, the issues with not being as diverse as we should be. And do you think?
And our perspective. Sorry, I was just going to say our perspective is this is not a competitive advantage for EA. We're not hoarding this stuff that we're learning or these things that we're creating. Yeah. We actually think that when more game companies, more studios adopt this, it's better. So we're constantly sharing. We developed an inclusive design framework that we use in our game development process. That encourages our developers to make the most inclusive creative decisions they can throughout the whole life cycle. We openly are out sharing that framework with others and asking them to improve upon it. We took a number of patents. We've done some work in accessibility around colorblindness, some work around toxicity. We created the ping system in Apex Legends. We've created some technologies around colorblindness. And we put all those into a patent pledge, and we made them openly accessible for free for all developers to integrate in their games. So, back to that question of like, if you're a smaller studio and you don't have a lot of resources, one of the things you can do, one of the things that I try to do when I'm attempting to learn something beyond what I already know, is I go and seek out others who are already in that space.
Yeah.
And try to find what resources already exist. And there are a lot of resources that are out there, and we're going to be constantly adding to those resources because we just want everyone to feel like there's not a lot of barriers to being more inclusive in the way we develop games.
Yeah. And I think that's testament to the industry. I'm forever surprised by how much collaboration goes on within the games industry. I speak to colleagues of mine across my business, and we work across all sorts of different sectors. But I don't think we see it as much in any other sector because people have such passion for making fantastic games and pleasing players that actually they will collaborate with competitors and they will share learnings and they will get around a table and discuss what's difficult for them. And there isn't that panic about sharing, hey, we're not good at this. Actually, everyone's reasonably willing to do that to some degree. Sure.
I mean, it's a great point. We can take some good things from our history in gaming. We really did. It was a community that really felt like they were doing something different and special that the rest of the world didn't understand. But as a result, there's a greater sense of community amongst developers. Like, hey, let's do this together because we're just trying to increase the number of people who enjoy these stories that we make. And I think you're right. I think that's a great thing that we should continue to carry forward is that sense of community. We're trying to all do something together. And of course, it's also now big business, and it's bigger than most other forms of entertainment as a business. But it still carries, to your point, Kathryn, it carries that essential essence of like, well, we're all here trying to make these very cool experiences. Let's share. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you ever so much for your time, Chris, today. Really appreciate it. Lovely to speak, as always, and hopefully speak soon. That was a lot of fun. Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you. Bye.